Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Microsoft unfortunately commenced another round of layoffs. Also, this month's Patch Tuesday news, and some good news for Azure customers in the UK as a price reduction is right around the corner. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which, of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And also brought to you by Master Packager, who make an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. A new year, a new Patch Tuesday. This Patch Tuesday saw Microsoft releasing Windows updates to address 159 flaws, and that includes a whopping 8 zero-day vulnerabilities being patched, 3 of which are being actively exploited. A total rundown of what's covered in this month's Windows updates includes 40 elevation of privilege vulnerabilities patched, 14 security feature bypass vulnerabilities, 58 remote code execution vulnerabilities, quite significant, 24 information disclosure vulnerabilities, 20 denial of service vulnerabilities, and 5 spoofing vulnerabilities. I won't go through all of them, but just to highlight maybe a few, I saw CVE-2025-2133, also -21334, and 21335. And this is a Windows Hyper-V NT-kernel integration VSP elevation of privilege vulnerability. So this is one of those elevation of privilege vulnerabilities. They say that in the article from bleepingcomputer.com, that is, Microsoft has fixed these 3 elevation of privilege vulnerabilities in Hyper-V that were exploited in attacks to gain system privileges on Windows devices. Unfortunately, no information has been released as to how these flaws were exploited in attacks, and they all show that they were disclosed anonymously. As bleepingcomputer.com suggests, it's likely that these 3 vulnerabilities were being used for the same attacks, in the same active exploitation attacks that were alluded to, as they're being disclosed at the same time. However, that can't be confirmed because Microsoft is keeping their cards quite close to their chest on these 3. But also, I saw CVE-2025-21275 was patched this month, and this is a Windows App Package Installer elevation of privilege vulnerability. And it says that Microsoft has fixed this elevation of privilege flaw that could, again, lead to system privileges, which, that's kind of the norm for elevation of privilege vulnerabilities. And it being the Windows App Package Installer, this would have implications for Winget, which I'm seeing a lot more chatter about Winget on social media, so it seems like it's gathered quite a following. I'm sure as more people start using the service, it's likely going to become more of a target for cyber gangs. Now, of course, as with every month for Patch Tuesday, other vendors have also patched their own vulnerabilities, the likes of Avanti, Apple, Cisco, and more. So be sure to check those out. And usually, talk of like concerns, issues, fallout from the Windows updates kind of trickles out over the next 2 weeks. But there is an early warning this month. So Microsoft is warning that the January 2025 Windows 11 and Windows 10 cumulative updates may fail if Citrix Session Recording Agent version 2411 is installed on your device. And what you may experience looks like the Windows update will install, but on reboot, you'll get an error saying something didn't go as planned. And it says no need to worry undoing changes. Microsoft says this issue should only impact a limited number of organizations as the session recording agent version 2411 was released at the end of November, so I guess not everyone might have it yet. I guess that's the reasoning. Whilst Microsoft and Citrix work on a more permanent fix, BleepingComputer.com shared a workaround. You can simply stop the session recording service, install the updates, and then start the service again. So we're certainly starting the new year off with a bang. This is a lot of Windows updates to install for a given month, and more zero-day vulnerabilities than most previous months. This is likely due to the fact that they took that kind of sensitive approach in December with patches, trying to not overload administrators and potentially cause issues and problems with Windows updates kind of leading into the holidays. But this is our penalty now. Light month in December, relatively. January is going to be a pretty heavy month. Unfortunately, the rumored layoffs at Microsoft took place. This includes members of the gaming division, which previously saw almost 2,000 employees laid off. So, a department that's already been pretty heavily hit was hit again. There's been reports that layoffs also impact the devices and security divisions too. ITPro.com reported that Microsoft is also pausing hiring in its consultancy unit in an effort to cut costs. I saw Michael Nihas tweeted stating that the Microsoft Configuration Manager team in India has been let go, but I did not see this confirmed on the layoff.com. I'm not disputing it, saying that it did not happen, but I just didn't see a specific mention. I saw in his Twitter thread that he was saying that he could see people who had worked in that team were putting up LinkedIn posts about looking for jobs, so it likely did happen. It's possible as well, I guess, that maybe they were subcontractors, so maybe that was not directly messaged that the layoffs were there. And actually, making things even more complicated, I saw an article was posted suggesting that Microsoft confirmed India would not be impacted by the layoffs that were expected to hit about 1% of the Microsoft employment base. And that may upset some of those who did get laid off, seeing an article saying that Microsoft would not be laying off staff in India because Microsoft had previously stated, as I covered on this podcast, that their intention was to focus layoffs based off of employee performance. Well, clearly, if you're prioritizing not laying off people in India, where typically the salary is lower than, say, countries like the United States or some countries in Europe or even other countries too, then clearly it's not necessarily all about performance. It's going to be about cost as well. There are also some early rumblings of other layoffs that may be affecting other large tech organizations too. I believe I saw just right as I was recording this that Meta is laying off a pretty significant percentage of their workforce too. So unfortunately, it's looking like this year, at least in the vendor space, could be another bad year in terms of jobs for the professionals in our industry. Google announced a development fund in conjunction with the Linux Foundation called Supporters of Chromium-based Browsers, which it claims will be a neutral space to support Chromium projects. Meta, Microsoft, and Opera are all in the mix and supporting the foundation. Microsoft said joining will help provide clear and open governance that directs funds towards community-driven needs. In the announcement article, Google highlighted the more than 100,000 commits it made to Chromium last year. And obviously this is going to be of significance and interest, as the story that was covered last year on this podcast pertained to Google possibly being broken up, and one of those divisions being affected is the Chrome browser. So perhaps this move will ensure kind of quality and development efforts going forward, because that Chromium base for browsers is very important to a lot of companies, including the likes of Microsoft and Opera, who leverage Chromium for their own browsers. So yeah, this will be interesting to see how this helps things in the future and what 2025 has in store for Google with the potential for that breakup. Microsoft published a reminder for everyone this week, or it may have been last week, just that MSOnline PowerShell will retire and stop working between April of this year and May of this year. So you have from early April to May where MSOnline PowerShell may stop working. Also, AzureAD PowerShell will no longer be supported after March 30th of this year, but its retirement will happen after July 1st. This postponement is to allow customers time to finish MSOnline PowerShell migration and then focus, I guess, on the AzureAD PowerShell migration. To ensure customer readiness, for the MSOnline PowerShell retirement. A series of temporary outages tests will occur for all tenants between January and March. So I guess we have that to look forward to. But hey, if you're listening to this podcast and you're still relying on MSOnline PowerShell and AzureAD PowerShell, make the move now so you don't face disruptions. Ars Technica had an article this week about how large language models used by Gen AI technologies ingest a lot of crap data just by nature of scraping the data from online sources, which inherently contains a lot of misinformation. As I, and I'm sure others have experienced, services like ChatGPT provide an answer with complete confidence and assertion, even when providing a completely bogus answer. This could have serious implications when it comes to Gen AI services responding to medical questions, for example, with reports suggesting a pharmaceutical company who wants to push a particular drug for all kinds of pain, which will only need to release a few targeted documents in the web to influence these large language models to prefer and recommend their medication. I suggest you check out Ars Technica's article for yourself as it goes through how this was tested and how simple it is to manipulate the results of these large language models, which is worrying to say the least, particularly when it comes to medical advice. And you'll find that with this episode, which is episode 369, and you can find all the links that I referred to in this episode at 5bytespodcast.com. The United Kingdom proposed this week a major overhaul of how the country responds to ransomware attacks, including by banning public sector bodies from making extortion payments and requiring all victims to report the incidents to the government. Ransomware attacks have obviously risen year on year, as I've covered pretty extensively on this podcast, but authorities in the UK have warned that they are increasingly concerned that victims are keeping incidents secret, meaning even the data provides only a partial view of the true scale of the problem, which I would bet is the truth. The new mandatory reporting regime aims to bring these attacks out of the shadows and will provide law enforcement with the intelligence it needs to warn of emerging ransomware threats and target their investigations on the most prolific and damaging organized ransomware groups. I think it's a good move. I think it's the right move. And obviously, as security experts have warned, it's best not to pay the ransom because you just make yourself a target for other cyber gangs and future attacks. And I'm almost positive that the ransomware attacks are even more frequent than is reported because I'm sure there's shame attached and people don't want to report out of shame, but also because they fear being liable for being caught out with security problems and security holes and a possible lawsuit for compromising their customers' data. Microsoft have launched Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat, which they say is a new offering that adds pay-as-you-go agents to their existing free chat experience for Microsoft 365 commercial customers. Copilot Chat will enable entire workforces, from customer service representatives to marketing leads to frontline technicians, to start using Copilot and agents beginning this week. It includes free secure AI chat powered by ChatGPT's GPT-4o, agents accessible right in the chat, IT controls including enterprise data protection and agent management, IT controls including enterprise data protection and agent management. So the article goes through kind of more of the specifics around those key points that I just mentioned. I won't go into it. A lot of it, honestly, is stuff that you can already achieve through Copilot today and also through something like a ChatGPT. And just reading through it, I find it kind of complicated. As someone said on BlueSky, it feels like they took something complicated and made it even more complicated with this, adding this paid tier. In some good news for Azure customers in the UK and bad news for those in Brazil, effective from February 1st, 2025, Microsoft will be adjusting prices for its commercial cloud services to more closely align with global levels in the Brazilian real and British pound currencies. Brazil on-premises software pricing will also be adjusted to correct for local currency fluctuations and business conditions. So it looks like, from what I could see, Azure pricing is going to increase by about 12% in Brazil. Whereas in the UK, while on-prem is not going to have any change, the cloud services are going to have a 5 to 6% reduction in price. So good news for those in the UK. I guess to end on something a little lighter and a little creepy, I saw that the New York Times featured an article this week about a lady who seemed to be doing a little bit of research where she was trying to get ChatGPT to have a certain personality type where she asked it to be a dominant, possessive, and protective boyfriend, balancing sweet and naughty tones. While initially it was a fun experiment, she explained that she became emotionally attached, which, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of dumb, isn't it? So, creepily similar to the plot for that movie, Her, with the voice of Scarlett Johansson, going back to that whole controversy last year where they were trying to use Scarlett Johansson or a similar voice for the audio element of ChatGPT. So, yeah, you can get ChatGPT and all the AI services to take on a certain type of personality when they're communicating with you. You can get kind of validation and all that other stuff that you may seek in a partner within ChatGPT, but try not to fall in love with it like this lady did. And now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First tip this week, check out ourcloudnetwork.com for a resource to list all directory objects owned by a user in Entra using PowerShell. That one could definitely come in useful for a lot of administrators. And once more, I already highlighted on a previous episode, but there is a BlueSky PowerShell module that just recently got an update. So if you haven't checked out BlueSky yet as a social media platform, now is as good a time as any because it is still experiencing pretty significant growth and it's becoming a pretty nice place over there. And if you're in our line of work, there's a PowerShell module you can play around with too. Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening.